Next, from the Illinois Supreme Court, our one-on-one interview with Chief Justice Thomas Kilbride. In this rare interview with the Chief Justice, we talk about the functioning of the court, whether the Illinois judicial system is facing a funding crisis, and how technology is impacting the practice of law. This runs about 40 minutes.
Chief Justice Thomas Kilbride, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to visit with you.
It's rare that we get to talk with the Chief Justice, and I think of all the three branches of government, the judicial branch is probably the least covered by the media for a variety of reasons. And we thought we'd spend a little bit of time today exploring not only some of the issues impacting the court, but just how the court functions and its role. Let's start off here as we sit in the chamber of the Illinois Supreme Court here in Springfield. We see behind us there are 7 chairs, and that is where you would normally be sitting along with your fellow justices of the court. Give us an overview, if you would. How does the court operate? When are you in session? What kind of cases do you take? Just so we can get an idea of the working of the court.
Yeah. Well, we're in session, and we like to say, theoretically anyway, all year long, but we actually sit in Springfield for what's called a term, when we're in session to hear cases and we do administrative work. And that's during the months of January, March, May, September, and November. We pretty much have a limitation of 24 cases for oral argument during those sessions, during those terms in January, March, May, September, and November. But in addition to that, we have all kinds of administrative work that goes on behind the scenes. Where the bench is, where the 7 chairs are, there's a door, as you might notice in the back there, right behind the center chair, and that goes into our conference room. And that conference room is where we do all the decision making as far as votes on draft opinions that are going to be adopted by the court when we're debating whether or not to take a particular case that's been brought to us. To answer your question about the kinds of cases we take, it's across the board. In terms of civil cases, criminal cases, and by and large, I don't know what the statistics are, but I venture to say it's probably in the high 90 percentile of cases that are all discretionary, that we decide to accept or to take. I mean, there's a few cases that fall in some specific areas that are mandated by the Illinois Constitution that we take. So that's sort of the overview.
Now, I would imagine that one of those would have been, in the past, a capital punishment case, a death penalty case. Of course, now the state of Illinois has done away with that. So I guess that's changed your caseload to some extent.
Well, it has changed it dramatically. When I first started on the court back in the year of 2000, I think we pretty much had 1 full week of cases orally argued right here in this courtroom that were devoted to capital punishment cases, whether they were direct appeals, meaning the first round of appeals from the trial court directly to the Illinois Supreme Court. Because capital punishment, death penalty cases have always skipped the intermediate appellate court. They've gone directly from the trial court to the Illinois Supreme Court. And so we had the direct appeals and then what's called the post-conviction appeals. And usually, I would say almost always, it was a full week of arguments on that alone. So it used to take 3 weeks for oral arguments. Now we're doing that within 2 weeks. And we have, as you noted, Illinois has now repealed the death penalty law, although it's in the Constitution that we would still take those appeals. And we would in the future if it's ever reinstated.
I was going to say, if you have certain people still on death row, or do we? I mean,
well, yeah.
We're convicted of a capital punishment,
Sure.
I guess I would say, and so they may still be in appealing their cases. That I guess that you would have to take that if it came up to your court.
Well, we probably would take it, and I shouldn't say we probably would. I mean, it depends on whether or not they're technically on death row, since that penalty doesn't exist.
Right.
That maybe not be the correct, precise characterization anymore, but they could well have issues on appeal.
We'll go back to some other issues, but let's just again on the administration of the court, the structure of the court. Why 7? And tell us about how, as I understand it, the justices that sit on the court come from different parts of the state.
Well, not to be flippant about it, but the reason there's 7 is that's what the Illinois Constitution says. And the constitutional delegates in the 1970 Constitution. That's the current Constitution we operate under. Gave us 7. We had 7 before that. And I'm not sure how far back we'd have to go in the history of the state to come up with a different number. But in any event, there's 7. And to answer your question, how they're selected to come onto the court, we're all elected in a general election. There are 3 of the 7 who come from Cook County, so that's considered the first judicial district. Then geographically, outside of Cook County in the northern part of the state, from Cook County over to the Iowa border, basically above Interstate 80, that's what's called the 2nd district. I'm from within the 3rd judicial district, and that's again from I-80 and the Iowa border, basically down just south of Peoria. And then where we are right now in the central, this is considered part of the central district of Illinois, is the 4th, and there's 20 plus some counties. There's 21 in my district in the 3rd, and then the very southern portion of the state is what's called the 5th district. And each one of those 4 districts outside of Cook County has 1 each. So those are the 4 from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th district, and then going in reverse order back up to the top, the 1st district, although we like to remind my colleagues from the Cook County, even though they're the 1st district, they're all equal. They don't have any special standing.
Now, am I right that each of the justices within their district, they have some of their own administrative duties, do they not?
Well, they do.
Responsibilities?
They do. We all do. In the context, there's probably several examples, but I'll just give you one off the top. We have, in the context of administrative duties, we have a number of what are called Supreme Court committees that function on behalf of the court, and we have appointees, lawyers and judges, and we have a formula set up. It gets kind of complicated, but each one of us would have certain appointees to a committee, and then there's like the 3rd judicial district appointments that I would make, and vice versa, other folks in the 2nd and so forth make their own committee appointments.
If there's a vacancy of an appellate justice in that, does the Justice of the Supreme Court have any say in who's placed as their replacement?
We absolutely do. I think it might have been sort of a secret in the past, but I don't know that it's hidden anymore, not that it was ever intended to be hidden, but I mean, technically the full court makes the appointment, but the colleagues on the court defer to the justice who has the geographical area, who presides over that judicial district, to make the nomination, much like United States senators make nominations of judges and U.S. attorneys, and the president would confirm it, well, with the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. But in our case, the full court has to make the appointment. So those are all vetted by the full court, but the justice from the district where the vacancy occurs, whether it's on the county level at the circuit court or the appellate court, would make the nomination.
Now, as we pointed out in your title, you're the Chief Justice, which means that you have your own administrative duties in that you are actually the head of the judicial branch. So what responsibilities fall to you as Chief Justice?
Well, I am the chief, and it's a 3-year term. I started on October 26th of 2010, so I'm approaching the 3rd and final year of that 3-year cycle. And there's just a vast number of administrative responsibilities, and of course, there's the symbolic ceremonial aspect of being the chief to appear at different events and so forth. But in the context of the Illinois state budget, for example, the chief, every spring session before they finalize the appropriations, the budget, we go over to the Illinois Senate and the House and make a presentation before the Appropriations Committee, both in the House and the Senate, on the court's budget. So that's one distinct obligation. And then, as you probably know, and many people who are citizens in the state don't know this, and I venture to say a lot of lawyers don't know this, that there is a substantial administrative branch of folks who work for the court. It's called the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts System. And we have a gentleman by the name of Mike Tardy, who is our director, who's really the day-to-day operative. He's the CEO, if you will, but he's called the director. So I spend a lot of time working with him on a lot of administrative kinds of issues that run and support our entire court system, from you know, the probation work that's done in the state of Illinois through all these committees. And I'll just add one other thing. In addition to those Supreme Court committees I talked about, there's also what's called the Judicial Conference, made up, it's a conference of judges, almost exclusively, although we're going to soon make some expansions. We have some lawyers and other folks that work with the conference, but it's primarily judges. So all that committee work that goes on, whether it's on criminal jury instructions, civil jury instructions, the Rules Committee that adopts the rules that govern the entire court system on procedure, which probably gets boring to a lot of people, and even to lawyers to some degree. But there's just a vast array of issues like that.
It's kind of like running a business. You still got to do the book work, and that's not the fun part of it.
That's
There's
right.
always that administrative
That's right.
details of any operation. You mentioned that you would go before the appropriation committees of the legislature, and we covered once when Mary Ann McMurrow was testifying and she was laying out her budget needs. I'm curious about the funding of the courts. Everyone is aware that state government is struggling now with finances. I heard a report last night as we taped this on the local news that a nearby county, Logan County, who had a horrific crime, a family was murdered, and they're overly concerned, I mean, about the financing of putting those people on trial because of the massive expense. Let's just talk about the funding of the court systems. I would say whether you're a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican in the legislature, everyone would say the courts are a core function of government. And I think probably if most of us average citizens walking around the street, we just figure that you're properly funded. Are you properly funded?
Well, from our vantage point, and I guess we always have a bias because we have our own operation we like to run, I think folks would find it shocking or surprising, amazing, whatever word you want to use, that of the three branches of government, our state court branch uses less than 1/2 of 1% of the entire state budget. And when I went across the street, and the Capitol's right across the street to the west of this building, and talked to the Senate and the House, both at the budget and then also all the legislative leaders, both in the majority and the minority, I seriously, but you know, to some extent was hoping they might find it amusing, but I think they found it too amusing and didn't find it serious when I said, you know, we're 1/3, why don't you just give us 1/3 of the budget? And I'll tell you what, of the 33 1/3%, we'll take 3%, I'll give you back the third and give the governor a third, but they found that was amusing, but they obviously didn't do that. And the sad thing is, we've been taking budget hits year after year, and we're not, you know, above sharing the pain in the state, but our percentage is so small to begin with. Even if they gave us 100% of what we asked for, it's not going to hurt the entire state budget. And to give us an across-the-board cut in the same fashion they do to other entities within state government, proportionally is just not really fair. And probation in particular has taken the biggest hits. And you think that the budget that we received last year, or going into last year's budget, was $20 million less than was appropriated in the year of 2002. And 2002 was not a good budget year for the state of Illinois. I mean, there was a huge deficit to begin with. And as you know, following 9/11, the events in 2001, the economy was reeling to begin with, but yet the budget in 2002 gave probation in the state of Illinois $20 million more than what we had in this last fiscal year that just ended. And we took another hit again this year, another $8 million reduction that really hurts on a county, local basis to protect the local communities.
If I have this right, I think I read somewhere that the state pays 23% of the cost of probation and court services. And there's a shared funding, isn't there, between the counties, the local counties, and the courts as they operate in the various places like Logan County, where the county government up there was worried about the cost being incurred.
Right. Well,
and maybe the question I should say, Chief, is are there any examples? I heard some years ago, I never frankly verified it, but I heard hearsay, you might say, but that one of the southern counties was having to delay trials because they didn't have the money just to pay the jurors to sit, and not that the jurors get paid a whole lot of money.
That's right.
But I think that was something that shocked me, which is why it stuck with me. That, again, I was probably like a lot of average people. You think you have enough money to provide your core services. And I've heard in some other states that it's gotten so bad that they're delaying the trials or closing down the courts maybe for one day a week. And how would you assess the funding we talked about, but how is it impacting the operation of the courts? And to what extent should we as citizens be concerned about the smooth operation of the judicial branch?
Well, the court system is where disputes are resolved. It really has an impact as well as on the economy, because business entities throughout the state of Illinois, unfortunately, as they would tell you, and as we know as citizens and consumers, end up in controversies with other businesses that have to be resolved civilly and peacefully, and the way you do that many times is through litigation in the court system. And there are states that have looked at the idea of trying to even create specialty courts to resolve business disputes in the most efficient way possible. That's not something we're able to do at this stage, because we are really struggling to manage the entire court system with less money, both not only on the state level but on the county level. Because you're right, as you made reference, the counties also contribute to these operations. Like all the county courthouses, those are provided by the local counties. The state of Illinois doesn't own county courthouses around the state of Illinois. They're maintained by the local county governments, where the judges sit, who are paid for through the state budget, for example. So there's a lot of problems across the board, and citizens should be concerned. I mean, other states have had, we're fortunate to some degree that it's not as bad as it is elsewhere in other states across the nation. But I think if we continue to take these budget cuts, it's going to become a bad situation a lot sooner than later. And the examples you gave have happened around the state. I know Cook County, I think it was last fiscal year, it was last year, where the county was mandating the closure of the court system. Well, we took a stand and said, you can't do that. The courts must stay open. But as a result, they asked workers to take furlough days, county paid employees that were within their financial management jurisdiction. And of course, they took those 3 days off throughout, staggered throughout the fiscal year. But the consequence of that, collectively, when you aggregate it, is that work just didn't get done during those 3 days when you multiply that over the number of county employees. And that would be true in any county where there's budget cutbacks.
I know we've covered over the years some Supreme Court cases here that actually would have had an impact across the entire country. I think the Price case, the one was impacting the tobacco settlement, the other was impacting the question of whether an insurance company could be paying for auto parts or not. And so it's not even just impacting Illinois, it could impact nationwide, some of these decisions. Interesting to note. I'm also fascinated too. Everyone knows, especially the last 10 years of American life, how technology has come in and changed the way everyone's doing business. The Illinois Channel, I mean, we were the first to video stream in the state in 2003, and I had to explain to people what broadband meant. Now, of course, everyone knows. To what extent, we tend to think of the law as being a stagnant function, almost like the Ten Commandments, but I'm sure it's had an impact on the law as well, and I think one of the initiatives that you've taken as Chief Justice is to integrate digital technology into the law. Tell us, what impact does the digital technology have on the operation of the courts, and what are you trying to do relative to integrating the technology into the operation?
Well, we've done a lot already, and we're working on trying to launch some new initiatives here very soon. But I'll just give you a few examples. The opinions that are published by the Illinois Supreme Court have historically always been in I don't have any nearby, although there's some up on behind the bench on the shelf, a hardback bound book. And of course, that's the way I learned growing up in the legal profession and in law school, doing research with hard-bound books that are in the library shelves. But now most people know, I think in your audience, that books can be purchased online now digitally, whether it's through a Kindle app or Amazon and these different outlets. Same is true with our opinions. And we have now discontinued the written printed publication of the Illinois reports that collectively is going to save us about $500,000 here. But those opinions are now all available online to the public free of charge, and including the opinions, that used to be really out of sight, out of touch, out of mind, the so-called Rule 23 opinions. That was a technical term I shouldn't use, but it's the one that appellate courts would issue opinions under our Rule 23, but they weren't widely disseminated. They weren't in the published books. But now, under a change we made, all those Rule 23s no longer have what's called precedential binding value to them as importance, but they are all available online, and now anybody, any citizen can get that. And there's a really a vast array of information, not just in those opinions, but throughout our entire court system that's available to the citizens, your audience, on our website at the Illinois Supreme Court. They just do a Google search on, and we're actually using Google now to host our web page. That makes searching much easier than it used to be. I won't get into criticizing any of the bureaucrats within the state government and why it wasn't so easy before, but and there are things that folks can subscribe to for free, including getting copies digitally of the Illinois Supreme Court opinions, Illinois Appellate Court opinions, the rules that govern every court case from A to Z, and the jury instructions that are instructed to jurors in a civil case or a criminal case. That's all available online now, free of charge to anyone who wants to look it up. So all that's happened. We're also trying to move towards, in a more vigorous way, e-filing. And that means the electronic filing of court pleadings. And as you know, because you've been in and out of courthouses around the state, there's a lot of paper in a circuit clerk's office. And I wish I could remember, one of my assistants who's nearby knows this number, but I can't remember what it is, the amount of money, for example, in DuPage County they spend just on what's called file jackets, the jacket that holds the paperwork from a case from A to Z throughout the year, the amount of money they spend just buying the jackets. And then you got the paper itself when the copies are made and so forth. But
and the storage space to put
and the storage space, yeah, that's a very good example. We have a number of circuits that are spending a fair amount of money on a county basis for warehousing paper off-site, away from the courthouse, because there's no space in the courthouse. And we're trying to reduce all of that paper burden through the electronic filing of documents. And we have 5 counties right now that are pilot projects that are doing e-filing. We're very close to announcing in the near future new standards and principles that will, for guidelines, that will allow any circuit of the 102 in the 102 counties in the state to go to e-filing. And of course, it'll be up to the county to put the infrastructure together, but we've got the standards and the guidelines, the principles to make that happen, and that will happen in the very near future.
You know, when the Illinois Channel started recording Supreme Court cases, actually it was the very first thing we recorded was the challenge to the redistricting of, back in 2000, I think, was the first thing we
That was your first case?
I think, yeah, the first thing we,
I think I made that case.
But, you know, it's amazing how things have changed, and over the years, one of the things that I have found, we would often and do request to bring our cameras in to record. It may be that you're hearing 3 or 4 cases that day, but we're particularly interested in one. But given that our cameras are here, we'll record all of them. And what strikes me is how fascinating some of the cases are that come before the court rather. And some of them are very sad, but from a question of law, a lot of people, I think, imagine, forgive me, that the law might be just boring things, but sometimes you get into these questions of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
Right.
And I'm not quite sure how you ever resolve these issues, but there was the one incident, sad, where 2 young boys died in a quarry. The quarry owner had an insurance liability up to $1 million per incident. And the question came down to, was that one incident or two? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not asking you to review the decision, but it's fascinating, I think, what comes up. And we've had our viewers write in and say how they thought it was fascinating to listen to the judges and just how the court was organized in the hearings.
Sure.
Now, what's changed too, speaking of technology, as we sit here, is the court has installed various cameras, and now you video stream, I believe, your oral arguments before the court.
No, you're absolutely right, and I remember that case. It's out of Will County, but I can't remember the name of the case. But when you started in 2000, you had to bring all of your equipment into the courtroom. Maybe you still do that on case by, but you wouldn't have to necessarily, because a few years ago, I can't remember the exact calendar year, but there's one, I think there's 3 or 4 in this courtroom that film the podium, film the bench, and every single case that's argued here is on tape, on film, and it's not a live stream, as they say, but it's released usually the same day, but no later than the next day. And again, it's released on our website, available to the public. I'm glad you think some of this is exciting. I think there are many people who might watch it and would help them fall asleep at night.
Well, there are times when my eyes glaze over, but there's other times when it's just fascinating, you know, some of the issues that come before the court. And to that end, you have just recently announced an initiative as Chief Justice as far as bringing cameras, expanding televised coverage of the courts. And I'd just like to hear, why did you do that, and what are your thoughts philosophically of having cameras in the courtroom?
Well, I didn't do it alone, but I did bring it as chief, as one of the projects or initiatives during my term as Chief Justice to the full court. There had been past requests, as you know, as a member of the media, to allow cameras in the trial court level. Mm-hmm. I mean, the cameras here, this is not where there are live witnesses, so it's a big difference. But as you know, I come from the Quad Cities. That's on the Iowa border, the Rock Island area. And just across the river, the Mississippi River, is Davenport, Iowa. The state of Iowa has allowed cameras in their courtroom for, I can't remember how many years, but most of the time I practiced law for 2 decades in the Rock area. And I knew judges and I knew lawyers on the Iowa side who were able to work in that environment without any problems. And when somebody takes a look at cameras in the trial courts around the nation, you would discover that the border states, not just Iowa, but Wisconsin and Missouri, have all operated with, and to some degree, I think Indiana, although I can't recall specifically, with cameras in the courtroom without any objections. And in January of this calendar year of 2012, we announced on an experimental basis, I'm not sure if we really call them pilots, I guess maybe we do, different courthouses are allowed to apply to our court to ask for permission, and we have a communications director, Joe Tiber, who manages all that and handles it with the various circuits. And right now we have 5 circuits covering 13 counties in the state that are doing pilots on the trial court level, and thus far everything's worked fairly well without any incidents. And it's a joint effort, as you know, between the local media and the chief judges and the trial court judges to make it happen, and it's going well.
I know actually my cousin operates the court system as an administrator in one of the California counties, and her husband served as the judge for a year, the Judges Association. And we had a private conversation once when they were visiting, and his attitude was, "Are you not going to put cameras in my courtroom?" So I applaud you for doing that. It's obviously not universally felt. It varies by each individual, I suppose, as far as their thoughts on whether cameras are a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, I would add this, that in terms of our guidelines for these cameras in the trial court, we're not trying to establish a camera in every single courtroom. And not every single judge would handle the trial with cameras in the courtroom. So it's really on a mutually agreeable basis where the cameras are used with a judge who's willing to do it. And the judge retains complete control over the management of the trial and the cameras and how they operate. We've mandated certain basic guidelines, and you know that for example, still photo cameras cannot be making the clicking sounds during the court case. There's a limitation on how many cameras. I think it's 2 cameras at most. I shouldn't remember this, but I don't. That can be in the courtroom, and the media.
So the cameras are not installed. It's the media would bring their cameras
They would bring
in,
it in,
as the Illinois Channel does when we tape in this
exactly,
room.
exactly. So there's I think measures in place to keep it all in balance. We have to assure that the defendants and the litigants in a case, whether it's a civil or criminal case, are receiving a fair trial and not impacted unfairly by the media's presence. And as long as that can happen, and there's a measured, respectful, responsible way to cover the proceeding, it's allowed.
You know, the other initiative you had, and we just covered this press announcement not too long ago, as we sit here, in fact, just about a week ago, was to, on the 225th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution, you launched Project 225 with the Illinois Judges Association to send judges out into classrooms across the state of Illinois for civic education. Why did you, how did that come about? Who all was involved? But more importantly, why do you think that's important?
Well, I guess in twofold response to your question. We didn't really launch the 225 project. I think it's called Project 225. It was the Illinois Judges Association, and they came here and we agreed to host their announcement about the 225 project. But I, as well as other members of our court, have been individually involved in trying to reach out to the community, both in service clubs, for example, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, Kiwanis, and so forth, to talk about civics and specifically the third branch, the court system, and also good to go into classrooms, whether it's grade school, high school, or the college level, to talk about civics. And a lot of that was, at least from my vantage point and from some of my colleagues, when we attended a conference with retired Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, back in 2007 when she was at the Loyola Law School, talked about the lack of civic knowledge and the lack of civic education in this country. Because when you and I were in high school, a lot more civics was taught than is taught now. And unfortunately, with this focus on standardized testing, teachers are teaching to the test.
Right.
And they're dropping certain kinds of other areas of education, and civics is one of those areas that's suffered the most. And not to go on and on, but you know, they did surveys where more people, random average citizens on the street, could name the Three Stooges, Larry, Moe, and Curly, than they could name the 3 branches of government, the executive, legislative, and judicial.
It is sad. I actually, some years ago, got into a conversation with a young lady who was in grad school, and she didn't know how many U.S. senators there were per state. So obviously one of the things we as the Illinois Channel are trying to do is not per se civic education, but to certainly connect the actions of government with the citizenry. And again, it's a good initiative. I would applaud you and the Illinois Judges Association for doing that and bringing that to the classrooms.
Sure. Thank you.
As you enter your final year, what are your thoughts? Any more initiatives and things you would want to accomplish?
Well, we recently, back this spring, early June, I think it was publicly announced, we launched what's called the Access to Justice Commission, a commission comprised of judges and lawyers. And I'm trying to remember the numbers, they escape me at the moment. But there are a number of other access to justice commissions around the country, but I think in the 20-some number where we are. And again, Joe Tiber, our Director of Communications, I'm sure knows that number, but in any event, that's a commission that's just in its infancy, and we are trying to get things done this year and into the future as well, to make our court system more accessible to the public, to those who cannot, who are self-represented, who are not able to afford lawyers to go into the court system, those who have challenges on language, accessibility, and of course we have an obligation to be accessible also for those who are physically and have other kinds of challenges to get into the courtroom. That has to be addressed. So we're right now working on 4 specific projects. One is a conference that's going to come up in October in Chicago of the commission itself, and the full court's going to participate in it. We've got speakers coming in from out of Illinois to talk about what's going on around the nation, including the presiding justice from the state of Mississippi that is at the forefront of pushing this concept. We have a working committee on forms, how to standardize forms to make the court system more accessible, again, to those who are self-represented. We have a committee working on the training of judges and courthouse staff employees on how to interact, to deal with self-represented litigants. And then a final committee to work on language access, how to make the courtroom accessible to those who are not English as their first language. And whether we like it or not, that's a mandate from the federal government where we have to make our courts accessible from a language standpoint. And again, I think technology may be the ultimate solution on that, to make interpreters available, again, through cameras. I mean, there's a cost factor to all of this, and we want to get ahead of the curve and plan this out and figure it out.
It really is fascinating that all of us have to struggle. We do, trying to keep up with the new technology and what's out there, and sometimes now when you put something on a YouTube, but they actually have the technology to close caption some of the verbiage that's going out there. So perhaps some of this can even be brought in by third-party vendors. But Chief Justice Thomas Kilbride, before we wear out our welcome, we'll say goodbye and thank you again for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I want to thank you. You do a wonderful job on behalf of the state of Illinois.
Thank you, sir.
I don't mean the government, I mean the people in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You bet. My pleasure.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.